Hi all, welcome to another session on um, Snowflake for data engineers. So in this session, I'm going to be talking about service role. Our aim is to connect to Snowflake using Python. As a prerequisite to that, we have already talked about users and roles, how to create new users in Snowflake, and how to create roles, how Snowflake assigns privileges to the database objects in the form of roles. This is called as role-based access control. And then how we assign privileges through roles instead of assigning access directly to the user. And we have seen a practical example in the demo session about how to create users, how to grant access to a particular database and a schema and the tables in it using the Snowflake commands and some caveats around it. If you want more information, please check out the previous video. Now, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on service account. So normally when you create a user, usually it is for a human user. So for example, a company named Algorithm, if they have like 50 employees and 25 of them need access to Snowflake, then we will create 25 users, and these are all human users. But a service account is something that is a non-human identity. So the algorithm company want to run some ETL pipelines. So that will be fetching data from multiple data sources and loading the data into Snowflake. So this process is defined in a Python program. We have already talked about that contract hire program, which collects data from SFTP site, 5 different SFTP locations, and then we performed some data cleaning, and eventually we wanted to load this data into Snowflake. So we have been doing all this using Python. Using Python, we connected to SFTP servers, and then we downloaded the file and we performed transformations on the file. Now, using the Python program, we need to store this data, the cleaned data, into Snowflake. So as a security measure, Snowflake will not allow anybody to connect and access the data or store the data. Some security measures should be there. So the best practice is you should never use a user's account for the automation processes. You should create a separate account, usually called as a service account. And you should create a service role, and using that service role assigned to the service user or service account, we will be able to do we will be able to connect to Snowflake from Python and then perform the necessary operations. That could be inserting into the database tables or retrieving data from database table. Once the connection is established, the data transfer can be two-way. We can insert into or retrieve from Snowflake. So before demonstrating about how to create a service account, let me show you something. So when I search about service account, it says non-human user identities used by applications automation processes. So recently, so traditionally service accounts, we have been accessing Snowflake using password. So just like creating a user, we create a user for that service account, the Python process, and then all the Python process will be connecting to Snowflake using that service account. And the authentication and authorization is done via password. There were some data breaches in the recent years, so Snowflake is tightening its security policy. As a result of that, it is mandating that for human users, multi-factor authentication is mandatory. But for service accounts, where we will be, once the Python program is returned, we will be scheduling it to run automatically. Usually the ETL pipelines will run early in the morning, like from 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 12 o'clock midnight until 3, 4, 5, depending on how much time it is needed. So nobody will be up early in that morning hours and complete the multi-factor authentication. So enabling or requiring MFA for a service account is not practical. So that is why the alternatives are key pair authentication or OAuth. So these are more secure ways of authentication instead of using password. However, as of now, password-based authentication is still available. So for this demo, first I'll be creating a service account using password-based authentication, and then in a later session, we can talk about how to do authentication using key pair. Okay, so let me switch into my Snowflake. Okay, so first of all, show users. If I run this command, currently I have 3 users. These 2 are default users. This is the one we have created during the last session. Now, if I want to create a service account, just a recap of what we have already learned. So in order to create a user, this is something that we have used. Here, we need to assign the default role. So for this user, we have assigned the role BI analyst, but for the service account, it should be a service role. So first we need to create a role and then we will create the service account. So you know the syntax for creating a role. So I'm just trying to see. Okay, use role, create role. Okay. So let me copy this section here, create a role. So usually these kind of creation of users and roles, it should be done as a security admin. So let me assume the security admin role and then create the role called uh, maybe service ETL. Yeah, something like that. Okay, now if I run this query here, this particular role is not assigned to anyone. So we just created the role. So that's why this table is empty. And we have seen 2 comments. I'm just repeating it again so that it will be like a revision for you. Show grants on role. So we can, if you execute this command, you can see that this particular role has just ownership. So we haven't assigned anything as well, any permission. So okay. So now what we can do is we can assign some permission. So the permission assigning part is here. Let me copy that. So grant usage on database to the role, grant usage on schema to the role, and then grant select. Here for this particular role, it's not just select, it should be able to update the table as well. So grant select comma insert on all tables in schema to this role, grant select comma insert on future tables. So let me execute all these commands, run. Okay, now let me run this command again. Ownership. Okay, sorry. So if you want to know the permissions assigned to this role, you can see This role now has the usage permission on the database and the schema, insert permission and select permission. This will be the tables. Then there is another table. So even if you create future tables, it will have permission to insert as well as retrieve the data from those tables. Again, this particular role is not assigned to any role, any users yet. So let's create a user and then we can check that query again. So for creating the user, let me copy the code from here and then I'll edit it. So maybe I'll name this ETL user 1, login name ETL user 1, email is not needed, um, default role is going to be this one, must change password. For a service account we can set this to false, and default warehouse is usually the best practice is we will be creating a new warehouse and use that warehouse. So let me see. So if you go to admin and warehouses, there's only compute warehouse now available. So I'm assuming as is admin. So what I'll do is I'll create a new warehouse, ETL warehouse, and it's going to be, I'm not going to be doing a very long running jobs. So I'm going to keep my cost lower, I'm going to choose extra small. So if you run the warehouse for 1 hour, it will consume 1 credit. 1 credit is something around $2, $2 to $3, depending on the kind of deal you're getting. And here we have some different options available. So let's keep it the simple, the basics. So let me create the warehouse, ETL warehouse. Okay. Now let me go back to my query. Okay, so let me try to run this. Okay, ETL user 1 successfully created. Now that we have created the user, the next step is, so creating the user doesn't give them any permission. So we need to associate a role or assign a role to this user so that the user will be able to access some things. So this ETL user 1, so we have created this role um, for the ETL user. So we need to assign this role to this user. So let's see how to do that. Uh, so grant role to user. Grant role. What is the name of our role name? SVC ETL to user, ETL user 1. Okay, statement executed. Now let's check this command here. So these are the different permissions available to this role and who has access to it. Role, SVC ETL, ownership. Okay, grant role to user. Okay, this is giving information about the role. Grant role sub user. Anyways, now let's look at how to, now that we have created a role and a user to connect to this Snowflake. Let's try to do the actual work. So let me create a new Python notebook and let's do the steps. So the first step is going to be we need to import the connector module if we don't already have one. So if you want to install something, this is the command that you can use: pip install Snowflake connector Python. So if it is not installed, it will install that. So in my case, I already have it. So it's giving me that requirement already satisfied. If I don't have it, it will download and install it. Now that I have this package, now let me import it. So only when you're doing it for the first time, you need to install it. Once it's installed, then you can just directly import it. Import Snowflake dot connector. Okay, sometimes you do get warnings for now, so this is why we need to create separate environments so that there won't be any conflicts between the different versions of the various dependencies the various packages have. We will talk about that in another session. So for now, let's see whether it will cause any trouble when we actually try to connect to Snowflake. So here I have already talked about creating a config file in another video. So as I mentioned, it's not a good practice to hard code the passwords directly in your script. So I'm going to follow that best practice here as well. So I already have the location of my config file stored in environment variable, and then I'll store all the username password related to everything in that config file. In this way, environment variable, I only have to store one thing, and everything else I can get from the config folder and the config file. So you might already be familiar with it. Just to revise it, I'll just do that one more time. So first of all, I need to get the location of the config file from the um, environment variable. So for that, in order to access the environment variable, I need the OS module, and then os dot get env, and the variable name is py. I think it's pyconfig file. Let me check. So if I'm checking it, there is no point in doing it. In the actual script, we won't be printing it. So as long as you don't print it, it's good. So for now, as I'm still doing the development to make sure that everything is fine, I'll still check it. Now that I know it is good, I'll store it into a variable. Config file equals. Now if another person who don't have access to your Snowflake, who don't have access to the sensitive information, look at your Python script, looking at this line, they won't be able to know where actually is the config file is stored. So that's why we use it this way. Now that we know where the config file is stored, the next step is load the config file into a config parser object so that we can access the values in it. So for that, what we need to do is we need to import config parser. So from config parser, import config parser is the name of the class. Now we need to create an object. Config equals config parser, and using this object we can read the config file. So here config.read, and we need to specify the location of the file. The location of the file we have stored here, so I'll just pass it in here. Let me run it. Okay, so it was able to read the config file stored in here. Before that, I need to put the details in the config file. So let me open my config file. See, I have just some dummy values in the config file. Let me edit it properly. So let's see. For the user, what is the name of the user? ETL user1. So when you're putting values in the config file, you don't need to use double quotes. So what is the name of the segment? You put it inside square brackets, and then all the values and variables in within that section. Okay, so now I have user, then password. I have used some password here, right? So I'll use that password. Now, in order to access the Snowflake, we will also need account information. To get the account information, you can come here and view account details. If you click here, so this is a trial account, so don't try to connect to this account. This will expire pretty soon. So here you can find the necessary information, so that you can connect to the Snowflake account from different applications, whether it be your reporting applications, your ETL tools, um, name it, Python, AWS, Azure, uh, whatever it is. In order to establish that connection, you need some information from Snowflake. So that information you can find here. So and config file, you can get this account equals. So I'm not going to log in as this user. This is the name of the user who is using this Snow site UI. The UI of Snowflake is called a Snow site, I guess. But when I am connecting from Python, I'll be using a different user. That is why I have used the username of that user. Now the account is this value. So I'll just copy it from here and put it in my config file. Okay, now if you look here, where is that Snowflake? Uh, Additional information you can pass on is warehouse, database, and schema. So warehouse is, in order for the SQL query to run, we need some compute. So the compute in Snowflake is called warehouse. Don't confuse it with the data warehouse. Data warehouse is a different thing. Warehouse in Snowflake means the compute power needed. Extra small, small, medium, those kind of warehouses that we create. So if you look here, security admin don't have access to warehouse. If I change to sysadmin, there is three different warehouse available. So this is something I have created um, for the purpose of ETL. So ETL warehouse is something I can use. Uh, so in order to create the warehouse, you come to admin section. Under warehouses, you can add warehouses, whatever the size, and you can add it. So going back to my worksheet, I think I have already mentioned that in the video. Okay, so in the config file, I'll add warehouse. Okay, and for the role, what is the name of the role that this user is going to use? One user can have multiple roles, that is why we need to specify which role. Um, the role is going to be SPC ETL. Okay, so let me save this, and then I'll read that whenever you make changes to the configuration file, you need to execute this part again, because when I executed this code, it was reading whatever was earlier available. So even if I save the changes in the config file, it is not available in this variable because um, it has already read the file. So that is why I need to rerun this line, and then let me maybe read one of the configuration and show you how it's working. So now I can use this config object and call the get method The first parameter is going to be the section. So in our config file, Snowflake is the section, and under that the specific variable we need is user. So if I run this, see, I can get this value. If I run maybe role, I can get this. So this is how we extract values, and we will store it into variables. So user equals this. Let me copy it so that I can get all the values. How many values do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. User, password, account. What else was there? So user, password, account, warehouse, and role. Warehouse, role. Okay, perfect. So now if you look, we are reading the configuration file, and from the configuration file we are getting the values of our credentials to connect to Snowflake. Now using this, let's try to connect to Snowflake. So for that, the syntax I copied from the Snowflake documentation. So we need to create a connection object using the imported module snowflake.connector. So for that object, Snowflake, what is it? Snowflake.connector. Snowflake.connector has a method called connect, and we need to specify a bunch of parameters. User equals, we have the username stored in the variable user. Now password equals password, account equals, so this is the name of the parameter in Snowflake documentation. This is the right side is whatever variable you have. If you have used account name, you need to use account name here. Okay, now warehouse equals, I have used the variable name warehouse, and role equals role. Snowflake.connector. So this is the documentation for Snowflake connector. So we need to create a connection object and then call the cursor and execute the method. So if you need to look at the different parameters of it, let's see whether I can get it. It's getting the variables from values from the environment variable, user, password, account, session parameters. This is the one I'm using. Okay, so now let me try to run it. Fingers crossed. Okay, I don't see any issues. Let me print the connection object. Yeah, it is a connection object. Now that I have established a connection, using this connection, now I can execute queries. So this is like, first of all, if you want to phone somebody, you need to first establish that call. So you need to dial that number. If you want to call your friend named A, then you will dial the phone number of your friend A. And then once that call is connected, you can talk. The friend will be able to hear. Whatever they say, you will be able to hear. But friend B or C, whoever contacts you have saved in your phone won't be able to be part of this conversation because you didn't establish a connection with them. In the current call, you're calling only friend A because you have dialed their phone number. Just like that, there are n number of Snowflake accounts out there. So if you want to connect to your Snowflake account, your specific Snowflake account, just like dialing the phone number, you need to specify the connection parameters like this. These are the bare minimum things you need to specify: username, password, account, and then what warehouse to use for running the command, and then role. So it's not as simple as just dialing a phone number. You need some extra information. Now that one connection is established, there is this connection object. Using this connection object, we need to create a cursor. Okay, so cursor equals, let me try to print it out. Okay, we have created a cursor. So this cursor is a database object. It is used to execute SQL queries and fetch results. So using this cursor object, you can run SQL queries. So it's like a pointer to the result set. So let me just run one query so that it will be easy. Okay. Now that I have the cursor, what you need to do is cursor dot execute and then just run any query. Say for example, what can I run? Let's see. Algorithm.dev.external data. Um, what is the table? There is a mappings table. There is a vendors table. Okay, let me try to connect to vendors table. So just write an SQL query. Select star from. You can use capital or small. It doesn't matter with Snowflake. So let me do this. So using the cursor, I'm executing a query. Now that the query is executed, this cursor will be pointing to that result set. Now we can use some methods to get the actual values. So this is not useful for you, right? But it is pointing, it knows where to get the data. So to get the data, we need to use a different method. So cursor dot fetch one is one example. See, now I can get the values. Whatever you get, if you run it in Snowflake, this is the value I have in Snowflake. That same value I'm able to get from my Python program. So if you want to get, for example, just the vendor name, so this is a tuple. So what you can do is, so another thing is, cursor, when you execute the fetch one, it will fetch the first row. Now this table has only one row, so now the cursor will be pointing to the end. So that is why when I try to use fetch one again, the query result is exhausted now. If there were multiple rows, then this will work. It will fetch another row, the next row. But as the table had only one row, this won't work. So what I need to do is, I need to refresh the cursor again. So I'll run that query again. That is why you can store the result somewhere. One row equals. Now we have it locally available. We are not relying on cursor. Now you can use it as many times as needed. So one row, and let me print it first. One row. And if I want to get only the first value, I can use this. If I want to get only the second value, I can use, sorry, second value is null. I mean, by index 2, that means a third value. So yeah, so this is how we have established the connectivity with Snowflake. Another important thing to note is that these objects that you have created, the cursor and connection, and the once you are done playing with it, once you are done using that, so if you make a phone call with your friend, will you leave the phone after you have talked to them, whatever you wanted to talk? Will you leave the phone open? Will you leave the call open? No, you will end that connection, right? So just like that, the connection that we have established with Snowflake, we need to close it. We shouldn't leave it open. Um, the same applies to the cursor as well. So first we need to close the cursor. So cursor dot close, and then we also need to close that connection as well. So this is some cleanup work that we need to do. Okay, so this is how we have successfully established that connection with the Snowflake. So as a recap, let me put everything in a single block. So if we want to connect to Snowflake, first of all, we need to import this module, and then we also are going to use OS module. So I'll put all the import together. So this is how, after working with the Jupyter notebook, how you put everything together so that you can have a running production script. Now that I have all the import, I'll create this object. So first I need the config file. Okay. Once I have the config file, I'll copy this. Using the config file, I'm creating this object and reading the config. Next, I need to read the parameters for connecting to Snowflake. Now, I need to create that connection. So the connection part, I can put it inside a try block, and once the connection is established, I can create a cursor, and maybe this query you can put it inside a variable as well. SQL query equals, you can use triple quotes, and then put it here. So inside triple quotes you can use space as you wish, and then use that query here. Okay, after executing the query, now the cursor will be pointing to that result set. We need to get one value. Just for the demo purpose, I'm getting one value. In the next video, I will explain how to get all the data from a table, get data if the table is very big, how to get it in batches, maybe 10,000 rows at a time, something like that. Okay, now maybe I can do int render is, I'll use an f string, one row 0, and vendor phone number is one row 1. So after printing everything, I need to close this. So the thing is, this connection cleanup code, this needs to get executed no matter what. Even if something goes wrong, if there is an exception, this code should always execute. So that is why you should put it inside a finally block. Finally, so whatever code you put inside finally block will always get executed, even if there is an exception. Whether there is an exception, or even if it is successful, this block will always get executed. So just to make sure that it's not, this particular segment is not using any variables that I have already declared, because it's in the memory, I'm gonna terminate, interrupt the kernel, and then I'm gonna try to run again so that if I have missed declaring any variable, I'll be able to know. Yeah, vendor is vendor 1 and vendor phone number is this one. So this is the small program how to connect to Snowflake and execute a SQL statement. That's everything for this session. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.